I believe you've all already seen that the U.S. Navy's warship number 121 has begun blockading the strait. So what does this mean for Trump? Let me walk you through it slowly. First, look at the first image. Not long ago, two supertankers had already reached the entrance to the Strait of Hormuz, but the moment they heard that U.S.-Iran talks might collapse, they immediately turned around and left. That reaction was extremely honest. People can keep saying the situation is under control, and the market can pretend it is still in wait-and-see mode, but ship owners carrying hundreds of thousands of tons of crude oil and risking real money never lie with their actions. They are not making a political statement. They are telling the world something in the most straightforward way possible. Trouble is coming here. Whoever wants to go through can go through. I'm getting out first. That is the cruelest reality of the Strait of Hormuz. In normal times, it looks like nothing more than a narrow waterway. But once negotiations fail, it immediately stops being just a line on the map and becomes a finger pressed against the artery of global energy. You do not actually need to blow up the strait, nor do you need to sink many ships. As long as the market believes the area may be unsafe, tankers will turn back on their own, insurance premiums will skyrocket on their own, and oil prices will surge on their own. Very often, what truly seals off the strait is not missiles, but panic. The second image is even more ironic. Trump's side is still talking tough, saying that if Iran refuses to give in, America's card to play is a maritime blockade. But the problem is this: in a place like the Strait of Hormuz, who can block whom is not determined by who talks tougher, but by who is closer, who can endure prolonged friction better, and who is more willing to drag global shipping down with them. The U.S., of course, has naval superiority, but Iran sits astride the geography of the strait, and that leverage is natural. So the picture becomes almost absurd. Trump is threatening to choke Iran, but in reality, it is the U.S. and global energy transport that are being squeezed by Iran at the throat. You want to blockade someone else, yet you are the one first constrained by geography and cost structure. That is the classic case of the stronger side talking the toughest while not necessarily calculating the price clearly enough. Now look at the third image. If the negotiations really break down, then this starts to look even more like strategic self-strangulation. The Strait of Hormuz is not only important to Iran, it is vital to the entire Gulf's energy exports, even more vital to global oil prices, and even more important to America's own allies. If the United States truly uses a full blockage of traffic through the strait as a policy tool, then in the short term it may look like pressure on Iran, but in the long term it means using the global supply chain, allied economies, and America's own domestic inflation as bargaining chips. To put it bluntly, this is not simply about choking Iran, it is about dragging the entire international energy market into suffocation. The U.S. can certainly create pressure, but the question is whether that pressure will first rebound not on Iran, but on America's own oil prices, voter sentiment, allied confidence, and global financial expectations. That is the darkest irony of all. If he really clamps down on the strait, he may not be hanging Iran so much as kicking away the stool beneath his own feet. Now look at the next few images, and the tone changes even more. The fleet deployment map in the eastern Mediterranean shows that this is no longer just a war of words. Forces are actually being positioned in key waters. Troop movements are themselves a form of language, and a much harder language than social media. You can place carriers, destroyers, and amphibious ships out there as a deterrent, but you can also interpret it as the holster behind the negotiating table already being unsnapped. The problem is that once forces are pushed forward, the situation is no longer fully controlled by political slogans. Any miscalculation, accidental clash, or mistaken identification can turn what was meant as leverage into the gateway to a much larger conflict. Next comes that summary chart of U.S. military aerial losses and damage. Whatever the disputes over each individual item may be, the chart reflects at least one thing. This is not the kind of conflict where you can easily declare victory, clap your hands, and go home. If high-value platforms, support aircraft, and drone systems are all starting to appear on the tally sheet, then the attrition is no longer symbolic. It is beginning to cut into muscle and bone. What modern war fears most is not one or two flashy strikes, but sliding into a stage of sustained bleeding, rising costs, and increasingly vague objectives. What the United States does best is high-intensity power projection, not maintaining an open-ended regional war of attrition at unlimited cost. Finally, that chart showing the status of the E-11A fleet feels like an indirect warning. What truly determines whether the U.S. can maintain long-term regional air superiority is not just the number of fighters, but whether these communications relay, command support, and battlefield management platforms can continue operating reliably. In the later stages of modern warfare, the real contest is not about who sounds tougher, but about whose system is still functioning, whose links are still connected, whose aircraft can still fly, and whose maintenance can still keep up. What you are seeing is not just the status of a few aircraft, but how much margin remains in the entire expeditionary combat system. So when you connect all these images together, the conclusion is actually very clear. First, the market has already come to believe the risk is approaching earlier than the politicians have. Second, in a place like the Strait of Hormuz, it is not whoever posts the toughest tweets who gains the upper hand. Geography and cost will turn the hardest-line slogans into the most dangerous boomerangs. Third, if the U.S. truly turns blockade into policy, that would not be a display of absolute control, but a test of whether it can bear the consequences of triggering an energy shock, allied anxiety, and military attrition with its own hands. Fourth, what is truly frightening about this standoff is not any single harsh statement, but that all sides are pushing themselves into a position where backing down becomes harder and harder. If you think my video is good, please give it a like and subscribe. It would be very important and very helpful for a new channel like mine.